everyone. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation. We are going to keep this going with our next session, also focused on what's happening around the world with building resilience, the effects of geopolitics on global trade and supply chains, where our speakers will discuss the need to find additional ways to build resilience in our global trade and supply chains. So please welcome to the stage Doug Evans and our excellent panel.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Evans. I'm the president and CEO of the Palm Beach Chamber of Commerce, maybe a little town you've heard about every once in a while in the news. And we're happy to be here today with this incredible panel to talk about supply chain and global issues. We all know that through the pandemic, all we heard was you couldn't get something because of supply chain. You couldn't get something because of the pandemic, things not being produced. But today it's exacerbated by global political issues. And that's what we're here to talk about today with four wonderful experts. I'd like to start with the Honorable Rob Silvers, who's the Undersecretary of Policy for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Rob, thank you for coming today.
Great.
We appreciate it. Rob, with the global disruptions from pandemics to everything else we've talked about, what's being done on the U.S. side to try to secure these trade routes and to mitigate what's happening with the losses of the products coming into the States?
Well, we're living in an era of supply chain disruptions, and it's our federal government's job to figure out how to work with industry to get ahead of those things and solve them so that consumers can get what they need, families can get what they need, and businesses can get what they need to stay competitive. One of the things we've done is we announced the creation of a new supply chain resilience center at the Department of Homeland Security, where we are getting predictive using data about where the next supply chain disruption may come from. We used to always be reacting. Something would be in short supply. There would be no semiconductors to make automobiles. There would be 50 cargo container ships off at anchor from the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and then we were already deep in the crisis and trying to figure out how to get out from under it. What we're doing is we're building a hub where industry and all the government authorities come together to look ahead, look around the corner, share information and data so that we can get ahead of these things. It's not just limited to the United States, though. We recently signed a three-way agreement together with Australia and the UK so that all our allied governments could work together to do this, because these supply chains are international. They're not purely domestic. So we're doing all these things, and we're getting into a position where our country can better absorb these things when they happen and have a quicker recovery.
You know, it's interesting, Reta Jo Lewis, who is the chair of the board of directors of the Export-Import Bank of the U.S., we were chatting backstage about all the public-private partnerships working on these kinds of things. And I find it fascinating that you're being proactive and looking for these things. But as you and I talked about backstage, what are you folks doing in concert with folks in other departments and other areas to help support them in those efforts through the bank?
No, absolutely. One of the things that we have been very intentional about is that President Biden and Vice President Harris has specifically told us that we need to all work as a whole of government. And as you just heard from the Undersecretary about the initiatives, as well as not only about other U.S. government entities that are all involved in this effort, but also what other countries, allies, and friends are doing. And we're doing the same thing. So going to your point about how intentional are we being, we've signed over 20 MOUs with our allies and friends, starting with our G7 countries, to make sure that we could continue to provide the kinds of financing that the Ex-Im Bank has been doing for the last 90 years. And one of the things, piggybacking on Rob's comment, is that when the president came in, he really asked all of the agencies to review what could they do in addition to what we were currently doing. And that's why we created our program about Make More in America, to incentivize, as well as to, for the first time on domestic soil, Ex-Im Bank is able to assist our manufacturers who are trying to grow and to expand, as long as the financing tools that we use, we're working with them on their transactions, have an export nexus, as well as always got to have that jobs component.
Yeah, I heard you mention this at another Concordia event, I think the Summit of the Americas. You talked about this program, it was happening and coming on, and one of the things you mentioned then was technology. And I know that technology in the Republic of El Salvador has been, you've been a leader in this. And one of the things I read about the country and the places, things you're doing, you're trying to get ahead of the technological side of supply chain disruption and the sourcing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've done as a country under your leadership and what's happening with this?
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. So yes, technology, it's in our DNA, and we believe that through technology, we're going to be able to give that big jump to achieve all the development, the economic and social development goals that unfortunately a lot of things have done in the past, but we're not there yet. But as a country, we do believe that we have to leverage that technology, if it's for trade facilitation, if it's for health, if it's for education, no matter what we're doing, we're looking how we're going to make sure that we innovate and adopt the technologies that better suit for El Salvador. We're currently, for instance, since we started our government back in 2019, we're taking a strong stand against red tape. Red tape was one of the main barriers to economic growth for El Salvador, and I know many of the company representatives that are here understand very well what I'm talking about, because it's not just an issue for El Salvador, but in partnership with companies like Google, we have been able to reduce significantly the time and all these requirements that were not necessarily in order to guarantee the health of our animals, plants, and people. But unfortunately, that was deemed important in the past. So this is a topic that is already generating a big impact in the companies and in the economic growth, not only because the reduced times that companies and costs that the companies are already perceiving, but because we're sending a message that we're committed to creating a business enabling environment. So this is one of the areas that we have been working and adopting technology, but also, as I mentioned earlier, telemedicine. We're working together a project with Google that soon will be announced by President Bukele in order to make sure that we expand the coverage and the quality of health services. But having said that, the government, we believe, has a big responsibility in terms of the adoption of technologies to provide better services for our populations and for our population and companies. But it's also, we've taken other objectives on board on us, which is promoting the adoption of technologies and innovation among our real economy sectors. Talking about our manufacturing sectors, we're working together so that they can adopt technologies that are going to reduce their costs, but also they're going to be able to produce cleaner. And the last area that we have done also a lot of work for the past 5 years is the promotion of our innovation ecosystem. There is a lot happening in El Salvador. There's youth that want to create new projects and achieve their dreams, and together with 87 institutions from academia, international companies like AWS, Microsoft, Meta, we have come together, the World Intellectual Property Organization, to make sure that our startups have everything they need in order to prove their concepts locally, but also be able to go international.
You know, one of the things, Rohitesh, that we talked about also as we were sitting back in the green room is, and you said it ethical, you talked about holistic approach, total approach, ethical sources of mining, and the areas of the world where there are fragile ecosystems and governance issues. You're in the industry, and we see lots of things that are broadcast around the world about ethical sourcing. Where are you guys on this? What's happening with this?
Well, look, I don't underestimate the fact that for some people in this room, the very term ethical mining might be an oxymoron, because you may come to this with a view that mining is necessarily bad. And I don't blame you for feeling that way, because we have been our own worst enemy as an industry, having had a record of really, really bad practices alongside some brilliant practices of sustainable mining. So I absolutely acknowledge why the industry's reputation is so challenged. And we have a lot of work to do to build trust with society that there are companies that are absolutely operating with the highest standards of responsibility. But when it comes to geopolitics, we are essentially a taker of geopolitics. We are prisoners of geography, as that wonderful book has a title, because we don't get to choose where the minerals are. But you might be expecting, Doug, for me to complain about geopolitics making our life more difficult, and in some respects it does. But let me give you a glass half full perspective on it, which is not me being a Pollyanna. I genuinely believe this, that were there not to be geopolitical competition of the way we see it today, it would not have given the West the proverbial kick up the proverbial whatever, to get our act in order to make sure that minerals are produced as responsibly as they possibly can in countries like the United States. Had there not been geopolitics, we would not have had the kind of support that Reta Jo has been telling us about to promote domestic manufacturing. We would not have had 14 countries in the Mineral Security Partnership, led by the US, to be developing supply chains that are closer to home. We wouldn't have had Saudi Arabia as a major force for mining in the world. So, Doug, a lot of work to do to earn society's trust. I admit that, but we can see a path through.
Yeah, but Ro, with you in charge, I'm sure it's going to happen by next week. I'm positive that.
Please tell my chair that.
We talk about, with all four of you, there was an interesting presentation yesterday about Kenya and the amount of small businesses and startups in different countries that are happening. And most certainly, those small businesses who are the lifeblood of a lot of countries, they need to succeed. And of course, they are particularly impacted on getting their product from point A to point B with these disruptions. And this is open to any of you. Maybe Reta Jo, you got this look on your face. I know what you're going to say with this. And you work with a lot of small businesses.
Yes.
And what are you doing to help protect that supply chain to make sure that these small businesses don't start and fail automatically or immediately? This is really important at this point to make sure they survive.
You know what, Doug, you're absolutely right. It's not just start and fail, but also they may want to pivot. And during COVID, we saw that they did want to pivot. And so as the Export Credit Agency, and you know, we use our tools, whether it's direct loans, working capital guarantees, export credit insurance, as well as our Make More in America new tool that we just voted on last year, where we already have 4 great transactions, small business, as well as some that have gone up to over $150 million. But from a small business perspective, that is one of the mandates that Congress has asked us to focus on. And not just small business for small business sakes. We're talking about everything from women, minorities, rural communities, disabled, veterans, LGBTQ, Native Americans, you name it. But the thing that has been so important about XM is that you hear from us about the large deals, but you don't hear that 87% of our transactions that we did last year, the authorizations that amount to about $8.8 billion, over $2 billion of that was done in the small business arena. And when I say in the small business arena, it was across sectors across the board. So what we did earlier this year, as to add to the support that our business specialists could give small business, was we added a new product called Equity Express Select. And that gave, we hope that would be an additional incentive for small business. We all know, we just had the Governor Lamont with us from Connecticut yesterday when we were celebrating our 90th anniversary. And one of the things that the governor definitely said to us is that the small business, which we all know is the backbone of not just the U.S. economy, but throughout all of our economies throughout the world, and that women and minority-owned business or people of color businesses are growing 2 and 3 and 4 times faster than the national average. So we've got to do everything we can. And one of the ways that we're also doing is making sure that we work with all of the international organizations, the economic development organizations in our state and local governments, as well as I say to all of you, making sure you work with our Department of Commerce and our embassy teams, the ones ours in the abroad, as well as those here. And as we learn and continue to educate our teams in those embassies as to how delegations who come to so many visits are looking and being very successful, because we don't want you to just come and take a look at doing work in foreign countries. We want you to compete, but more importantly, we want you to win, and we want to use all the tools that we have in our toolkit, along with making sure that we talk about the others and our other government agencies that can actually support U.S. companies who are exporting and foreign buyers who want to purchase goods and services to be exported abroad.
You know, I'm glad that you brought Governor Lamont, and he's an old friend of mine, and he's a businessman.
Yes,
and he totally understands the ecology of small businesses and how they become big businesses. So to partner with him and other governments outside of D.C., to me, is wickedly brilliant. So I'm glad you did that. Rob, back to you. It was surprising to me that you're being proactive about this, and this is the first time I've heard this. What are you guys doing as an agency to get the word out to all of these folks, to the small businesses that Reta Jo talked about, so that people know that you are there anticipating sometimes terrible things, but that you're ahead of it? What are you doing to get that word out? Because I didn't know that until the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, you know, on the note of small businesses, never before in human history has the fate of small businesses been so at the mercy of geopolitics and how national security and our economic security are completely converging. And a lot of it comes down to China. So, and I'll give you two examples, and then how we're getting the word out as part of it. First, if anybody's ever been to one of our seaports, our massive seaports, you see, these massive container ships pull up and these big, larger-than-life cargo cranes unload one box at a time from the ships. 85% of the cargo cranes at US ports are made by a single Chinese state-owned enterprise. So if you start to think about a potential scenario involving Taiwan, a heightening of geopolitical tensions, that is an unacceptable level of risk for this country to be carrying, because we are so reliant on the free flow of commerce through these ports, including small businesses that need that shipment to arrive or need that shipment to travel, or they're not going to get paid. And what we did at our Supply Chain Resilience Center is we got the data on that market concentration, and we put into effect regulatory guidance that the ports that operate those Chinese-made cranes have to have certain kinds of cybersecurity and physical security controls in place to mitigate that risk. And then we worked with the White House to cut a deal with Mitsui, a heavy industrials company from Japan, to start building ship-to-shore cranes for the first time in decades in the United States, so that in the long run, we can have a reliable supply. And then another example involving China is our trade, our supply chains, it has to reflect our values. And one of the areas where that comes up is the use of forced labor in all around the world, and in parts of Xinjiang province with Uyghur minorities in China. And what we've been doing at our department is enforcing the world's leading forced labor laws to make sure that products made by children or by Uyghur minorities that are operating in coercive conditions are not allowed to come into this country. And so our trade, our supply chains are now reflecting a concern for our national security and our economic security and resilience, and also our values.
It's interesting because, when you think about what we can't get, and Robbie and I were talking about this, it's everything from apparel to medicine. It's just not showing up for doctors here in Manhattan or around the United States, quite honestly. With this, we've got about 2 minutes left on this. It's almost kind of like the lightning round, as they would say. If you have one thing that you would like to impart as it relates to the resilience of the supply chains and global security, Ro, why don't you start? What would you say that we should have top of mind as business people, as NGOs, to really think about this for the future?
Look, certainly when it comes to producing the metals and minerals that go into absolutely everything we use, the closer we can produce them at home, not only is it better for security, it's often better for the social and environmental outcomes that we care about. I say that in the full knowledge that there is a strong resistance to having more mining or heavy industry of any sort closer to home. Now, rest assured, as an industry, we're committed to working through the issues as to why people may feel that reticence, but ultimately working through it is the only way to achieve economic security and sustainability.
Closer to home. Maria?
I would go back and sound a little redundant, but say technology. We need technology adoption within our countries, with our neighboring countries, and for the case of El Salvador in Central America, to make sure that we are all very well integrated, that we do trade in an agile fashion. That will not only bring competitiveness to our companies and attract more investors, but for food security and what we have lived in the past and container crisis and everything that we know that we have gone through, if we don't leverage technology in order to be more interconnected, we're not going to be able to guarantee that competitiveness and food security for our countries.
Super. Reta Jo?
I would say that for us, it's all about working with our companies to leverage partnerships and more collaborations. In the fact that not one government, not one agency, not one private sector can make sure that we and all of our companies in the sectors that we go after to compete in business can do that work by themselves. But it is really about leveraging our partners, leveraging our friends and allies, leveraging the private sector, and then making sure, we're talking about the effects of geopolitics on global trade and supply chain. one of the things that we have definitely made a practice is how do we work with our larger companies as they work within their own supply chains, so we can ensure that we educate them on the fact that we have some tools that can continue to help them grow and help them compete.
Rob, you want to bring this home for us?
It's building off what the chairwoman just said, which is a lot of companies don't realize how many tools the government has that can be helpful for what they need. We have unbelievable trade data about what's coming in and what's coming out and from where. We have the ability to form partnerships with other countries, friendly countries, to ensure reliable supply of scarce commodities. We have all kinds of things we can do, and we are approachable. People like the chair and I want to help, and we're here for that.
Super. Thank you all for being here. Would you give them a round of applause and thank them for their time and talent? Thank you.